Hi, I'm Cara Sofoko.
And I'm Gary Young.
Thank you for signing up to our over-the-top and under-the-radar Patreon package.
We really appreciate your continuing support, which helps us deliver this podcast weekly.
So let's get into this week's bonus episode. We hope you enjoy it. I'm not someone who doesn't believe there needs to be any defence spending or defence. I think that this unquestioned, it's just a good thing to spend more money and not scrutinise the money is something that drives me a bit bananas. Another thing that hasn't been talked about as much, but is part of all of the sort of current conversations about defence spending is the armed forces have what government reports call a workforce crisis. So we're going to pump all this money into defence, but we have a real problem recruiting people to all armed forces. And again, to quote a government review, that's because of there's poor recruitment and retention of armed forces because of shoddy accommodation, falling morale and cultural challenges. But I think there's it feels like the defence budget, which is untouchable and apparently is going to expand to at least 2.5, maybe even 5% because of Donald Trump and NATO. But yeah, there's there's a lot of reporting on the number and not enough reporting on how that money is spent or why it is that people who risk their lives for the UK are in substandard accommodation. So yeah, I think and he
did talk about that, I think, about the improving the housing.
He said by the next parliament they're hoping to recruit more soldiers. But yeah, I think there's a lot of interconnected things. Sorry, this was a bit of a bad tangent. Yeah, I think it's we probably do need to spend money on defence, but I have pretty low trust in the people driving the debate right now. And it's endlessly frustrating that it's the only part of the budget that we apparently can't question or say, I don't think this should just endlessly expand.
Or that they boast about increasing.
Yeah. And I think there's a real question about whether it makes us any safer and a real, lack of joined up thinking about the different ways that we relate to other countries. But, the arms companies will be happy. So,
yeah, no, that's the main thing. That's the main thing. I mean, there was something about the kind of the embedding of the military into the economic plan, which I also found a bit, this is also good for jobs, It's there is a gun manufacturing in America is good for the jobs of the people who are making guns, but don't make your life any better. Do you know what I mean? There are billions of pounds in America spent on different ways of finding protection against gun deaths. So it's a little industry, but probably just better to get rid of the guns and not have that industry and have life instead. And I feel a bit like that about it. Can we just talk about if this is a defense budget or an attack budget and what are we defending? Who are we defending it from? And as you said, how are we relating to the world? And none of that seemed to come up really.
There was evidence that Steve Reed had taken corporate hospitality. So he went to a football game by one of the companies that has an ownership stake in our water. I don't think there's any suggestion that he was lobbied at that football game. But why is the government so wedded to private sector involvement in an industry where private companies clearly should not be involved? This company is permanently on the verge of bankruptcy. And as you say, they are provenly terrible at running the company and delivering what we need, which is safe, clean water at an affordable price. These record fines that are coming in that Ofwat is now announcing and says will be paid by the company, its investors, and not by customers. One of the fines is for breaking dividend rules. So they break rules about how safe the water is and how much they can pay themselves. So I think it just feels like living in the upside down world. And the idea that this huge commission into the water industry that, was open for public submissions and unsurprisingly thousands of people submitted isn't allowed to look into nationalisation. The final thing I wanted to say about this was speaking to, we've touched on this before, but again, speaking to Chris Williams, who's the Green Party's head of elections around the locals, he said what they are getting on the doorstep a lot is it's either Reform or Green. And I think that speaks to something we've talked about before on the podcast, which is the number of people in the UK that are so frustrated and disheartened with with the political establishment and mainstream parties that they just want to hit a red button that says none of the above. I want something that someone's going to shake shit up. And if you're not paying attention and listening, it might seem weird to be between Reform or the Greens, but actually that's about a sentiment of I don't like what any of you guys are doing and I want something radically different. So I think that there's ignoring the Greens is also ignoring a growing sentiment in the UK that a lot of people just feel like this stuff isn't working and I'm not happy with it. And they're more often told that Reform is the none of the above option, and Nigel Farage is the one. But there are a lot of people who see the Greens as an option. Yeah, so I think there's generally underreporting of the party, and I will be paying attention to see who wins in September. And what I'm intrigued with is, Gary, you're not a member of the Labour Party or anything, are you? What do you think about the Greens? Would you consider the Greens? What would they need to do to win you over? What kind of leg would they have to show?
I mean, I voted
Zach
Green.
Or Adrian or Ellie was on what would you be like? Come on, this is what I want. Give it to me.
I voted Green in the last election. It turned out that I wasn't in Diane Abbott's seat because the boundary had changed and I'm on the border. And I voted for them locally. We had an issue with a school closure that school that my daughter was at, and the Green candidate was there for us. Whereas the Labour-led Hackney Council were the ones doing the closing, and they were pretty shitty about it and untransparent and so on and so forth. I wouldn't join them just because, I was a member of the Labour Party for a while, and it was really unpleasant. And that kind of, in the same way that my 1 year as a member of the Workers' Revolutionary Party when I was 15 really settled the idea that I'm not going to join a Trotskyist party again, even if I don't really have a problem with Trotskyists. My experience being a member of the Labour Party was that is the electoral, and I know the Green Party is a bit more than an electoral machine, but the electoral is not going to be where I'm going to put my efforts. I don't condemn anybody else putting their efforts there, but that's not going to be. I'd rather be involved in campaigns than in that. But I really like the way, one of the things I think about the popular perception of them is that they're kind of really middle class and frou-frou and all about them. And they're really kind of, they've got a considerable urban, diverse constituency. And so my worry is that I don't know that we've got the amount of time that it's going to take for them to get to scale. Still, the largest immovable object against the Tories and Reform remains Labour. And I think that's going to be true for a while. Labour is also the problem, as we've spoken about, on this podcast. So, I would have actively campaigned for them if they'd gotten rid of Diane Abbott. And I may actively campaign for them at another election. But it's just not where I'm putting my energy. I'm interested in whether you, as someone on the Labour left, would you switch teams?
No, I think that... Well, Tony Benn always used to say, people would always say to Tony Benn, what would it take for you to leave the Labour Party? And he said, if the trade union is disaffiliated. So I'm not going to pretend that I'm just with the Labour Party no matter what. I do think that party politics is a team sport. And once you've picked your team, I don't know how I feel about switching. But But I think that the thing I'm interested in, and like the political trend that I think is consistently underreported, is there's this received wisdom and the sort of, I don't know, Blairite, centrist, centre-right part of politics, which is, you've frozen for me, Gary.
Oh dear, have I?
Oh, I can hear you. I just can't see you. It's okay. So for me, yeah, my relationship with the Labour Party is a complicated one, and probably one that I can't quickly explain in a podcast. Probably its own thing. I think that the thing I'm interested in is, I think there is an assumption in the like centre and centre right of the Labour Party and political mainstream that voters on the left will always just fall in line and vote Labour come what may, especially if there's a threat of Nigel. So I'm not ever going to say never. I think for me, party politics is a team sport. I've picked my team for better or ill. I'm not going to say there's nothing that could change that would stop me from supporting Labour, but I'm not in the market for a new political party. But there is a big group of voters I think the media isn't talking about who aren't like me and aren't weird and didn't join a political party. That is kind of a weird thing to do, or at least atypical. And I'm interested in the 16% of Muslims that voted Green at the last election, the people who are on the left, and the assumption and prevailing wisdom from the like centre and centre right of politics, the kind of Blairite 101 is, pitch yourself in the centre because the left have nowhere to go. And I think increasingly the left do have places to go, and that there are a lot of people who are angry about Labour spending decisions and about Gaza who I think are likely to go to the Green Party. You know, you mentioned the constituency you live in, of these 40 seats where the Greens are in second. A lot of them are kind of London, diverse, multicultural seats that are very left-leaning. And I think the media endlessly wants to talk about the red wall or people who voted Brexit, and it's consistently not interested in people on the left and people who are likely to vote Green. And yeah, I think that is, I think there are some false assumptions there that, you know, you can just squeeze the Lib Dem and Green voters and everyone will come home to Labour and it doesn't really matter what Labour does. So yeah, I'm not tempted by the Greens, but I'm very interested in them. And in the fact that even in a media climate where they don't get talked about much, they're still making inroads. So yeah, intrigued to see who ends up winning. And I think it might be too late, but I think they've also got quite an open leadership contest. So if you do want to join, I think you can just join and vote, you know, very democratic. It's also how most countries in the world manage their water. Chile doesn't, but other than that, we are very unique. Scottish water is nationalised. It's English and Welsh water that isn't. So I think I wanted to bring it up because, you know, one of the many things I get obsessive about is just quite how bananas the setup is with these private water companies. But I also think at this point, journalists need to be scrutinising more why Steve Reed and why the government are so against nationalisation. So for those of you who care about the water industry, I think for my sins, I'm one of them. There were a couple of big headlines this week because the private equity firm that was going to bail out Thames Water, which is slightly confusingly named because it's the biggest water company in the UK and it provides water to not just people in London, it's London and surrounding areas. So Thames Water, which is, I mean, this is, you know, really saying something. Amongst the private companies in England and Wales that control our water supply, Thames Water is pretty consistently the worst. Yes. It's always on the verge of bankruptcy, which doesn't stop its executives from trying to make sure they're still getting huge payouts. Those of you who follow it closely will know in January of this year, when there were noises being made that Thames Water execs maybe didn't deserve their bonuses, their initial response was to say, well, we're going to have to bump up base pay if they can't get their bonuses. So this is a company that was in no debt before it was privatized in 1989, now has debts of about £19 billion and is permanently on the verge of collapse. An American private equity company had been in talks with Thames Water to bail it out. And this week we heard that KKR have pulled out of the deal. And so we've had some coverage of that. We've also, this government announced an independent water commission. Yes, that's right, another independent review. A few months ago, in 2024, senior civil servant Sir John Cunliffe has published an interim report, 100 pages, guys, into Britain's water system and the current regulatory system. So this week, we've had a report saying the current regulatory system for the water industry isn't working and has largely lost public trust. Probably not surprising to those of you listening in the UK or familiar with the UK. Our water isn't clean. The pipes and the systems that we need to maintain our water haven't been maintained. So this big report came out saying regulation isn't working. And this private equity company has announced it doesn't want to take on Thames Water's debt. I mean, who knows whether to cheer or not about that. I think the thing that I'm struggling with is this is something that's making some headlines, but I'm finding the conversation and debate amongst journalists really limiting. So, and especially because the conversation about renationalize. So in all of this context, this company is drowning in debt. It hasn't maintained the infrastructure that we need to get clean, safe water. That is exposing people who are Thames Water customers to higher bills, which most people can't afford, risk of flooding, risk of contamination. So water, which is pretty important to all of us to live our daily lives, in a huge part of the UK is not functioning. And the government is consistently maintaining that nationalising Thames Water is not an option. Steve Reed has said that nationalisation is not a good solution. He is open to some sort of an emergency temporary ownership. I mean, he has to be at this point because even the private equity firms won't touch Thames Water. But the thing that I find really confusing is why this government and why more of the media aren't pushing for nationalisation of an industry that never should have been privatised. And I think it connects with this idea of defence spending because Steve Reed says we can't afford to nationalise Thames Water. I think we can't afford not to. All of the official analysis suggests that if we don't deal with this company, not only will people who already can't afford their water bills have to shell out more for water, the National Infrastructure Commission estimates there's a 1 in 4 chance over the next 30 years that large numbers of households in parts of England will have water supplies cut off for an extended period due to severe drought. So this is something that we all need access to that is being consistently mismanaged by a terrible company. And the minister responsible still won't put nationalisation on the table, even though the majority of people in the UK want water in public ownership. Thanks for listening to this week's Over the Top and Under the Radar bonus episode. We will be back next week with another slice of bonus exclusive content.